So without further ado, I am delighted to introduce Glenn Knoblock tonight to discuss his book, New England Shipbuilding, with us. Hello, Glenn.
Hey, how you doing tonight?
Great. How are you? Go ahead and turn your video on if you're all set. Perfect.
There we
Hi.
go. Yeah, well, we're coming to you from New Hampshire here. We hope
Yeah.
everybody that's in attendance is doing well tonight.
Yes. So for those of you that don't know, Glenn is a native of Ohio, but he has New England roots. After graduating with a BA in history from Bowling Green State University, he moved to New Hampshire in 1984, and he has been there ever since. In addition to his latest research for this most recent book, he also specializes in African American military history, both at the state and national level. Glenn has been a primary contributor in both print and online editions to the African American National Biography Project, which was a collaborative work between Harvard and Oxford University Press. And his latest book, New England Shipbuilding, was published last month. So congratulations for that. And I know I'm a New England transplant. I moved here 6 months ago. So I am very much looking forward to learning a little bit more about New England and shipbuilding. And this is going to be a fun little history lesson, I think, for us all. So Glenn,
Okay.
I'll turn it over to you, and I'll join you again towards the end for those questions.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Stephanie. Thank you for hosting this event. We're gonna get our screen up here, and we'll get us all set here. And here we go. Okay, New England shipbuilding, vessels that made history. And that's really the subject of my most recent book. And it's really important to note that this book is for everyone. You do not have to be a ship expert or whatever. If you like a good history story, whether you live in New England, whether you visited New England, or whether you hope to come to New England, this is a book that I think you'll find interesting. It tells some of the history of New England through our shipbuilding history. We see two ships right here on the screen that really, one is probably very well known, especially if you live in Connecticut, the whaler Charles W. Morgan. And she has a fascinating history. If you've ever been to Mystic, Connecticut, then you know about the Charles W. Morgan. And my book tells her story. But also on the other side of the screen, probably a ship you've never even heard of, the Union, which sailed out of Newport, Rhode Island back in the 1790s under a 19-year-old captain, and the first ship of her type to make an around-the-world voyage. So there's a lot of interesting stories in my book that I hope you'll consider reading about. And what is really fascinating, whether you're a New Englander or not, it's our relation to the sea that really defines us as a region in New England, but also in many cases as a country. It's our country, of course, started out along this narrow strip of coastline on the East Coast. So a lot of our history is encompassed in the history of these ships that I highlight. And actually in the book, I highlight 70 ships that I think help to tell the story about New England shipbuilding from the very beginning. And that beginning was up in Maine, in 1607, a small little craft called the Virginia of Sagadahoc. And it was built by members of the Popham colony, which was actually a failed colony. It only lasted one winter, barely. Our early colonists seemed to have a knack for hitting New England shores in the late summer and having to endure those hard winters. And one of the ways they got out of New England and out of Maine was by building this ship, which took them back home. But it was actually the very first ship to be built in America. So 1607 was when it started. But shipping is what defined our country and our region early on. And that's how we got our people here, of course. That's how we shipped goods back to the home country. That's how we traded at first locally down to the Caribbean, but later all around the world. So I like to tell some of these stories through these ships. The Columbia that you see here on the screen, caught in a squall right off the Columbia River on the west coast there, and of what is now Oregon. This was a New England built ship over on Massachusetts that made history. One of the first ships to round Cape Horn and hit the west coast and make some exciting voyages of discovery that had never been done before. So we took our New England and our early American influence not only nationwide, but worldwide through these vessels. And it's also important to remember that the ships of our country have also served to protect us as well in times of peace and in times of war. Most of you will probably recognize in the upper part of the screen the USS Constitution, which was one of our very first naval vessels built after our country was formally established, and of course played a great part in the War of 1812. And is one of the oldest warships still afloat and commissioned as a part of the U.S. Navy today. She still has a crew that keeps her in good shape, and every once in a while we get her out and under sail, but she really represents the best that the U.S. Navy has always offered, and as her servicemen and women have served to protect us. And it's through vessels like this that we got our start. Now, in the lower corner here, you'll see the submarine USS Drum, which was launched on the eve of World War II up in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, or Kittery, if you prefer, right on the borderline between Maine and New Hampshire. And of course, you folks down in Connecticut may also know about the Electric Boat Company and its shipyard down there that built many submarines for our country's defense in World War II. The Drum had an amazing career and is actually a museum ship today down in Alabama. So you could actually trod her decks if you wanted to make the journey down there and to that museum. And that's another thing that I've tried to do in this book, even though a number of the vessels that I discuss are long gone, and perhaps you've never even read about them in your history books. A number of them are museum ships, both here in New England and beyond, that you can still visit and see them in person and really get a sense of what they have done. Me being a military writer, I've always had a fondness for vessels like the Constitution and the USS Drum and what they've done. And I like to think about the folks that have trod their decks and performed their duties heroically, and in many cases lost their lives doing so to help protect our country and maintain our country's democracy and our strength. So it's another way that New England has contributed to America's defense over the years, and we still do that today with the electric, with General Dynamics, now General Dynamics down in Connecticut, and you've got the Bath Iron Works up in Maine that are still building some of the finest warships in the world. So ships that serve and protect are a big part of the story. However, ships not only carry people, they carry goods, and that is also a huge part of the story. And here you see a couple Connecticut vessels that were built. The Seminole was what we call a Downeaster vessel. Right after the Civil War, she was built, and she served on the New York to California run, carrying goods and passengers there for many, many years. And it was actually one of the fastest ships ever built in Connecticut, and also one of the finest, most beautiful sailing ships you would ever see. So she had a long history. I tell a little bit about her and other ships like her that were launched, whether in Maine, Massachusetts, or Connecticut. We don't just look at sailing ships, though, in my book. I also take a look at the steamships, the development of the steamship. Now, it's interesting, New England really, especially northern New England, held held fast to the sailing ship, especially Maine, which continued to be the leader in shipbuilding, wooden shipbuilding right to the end. But steamships also played an important part in New England shipbuilding, and especially in Connecticut, Boston, and that area where many large vessels were built. Here you see the Minnesota, the SS Minnesota, which was built at New London. At the time of her building, it was the largest steamship ever built in America. So think of that, right over in New London, the largest steamship in the world was ever built. She had a capacity to carry the equivalent of 2,500 railroad cars worth of freight. That's how big this vessel was. So it was really an important part. So it's all about commerce. Now, I don't know how many of you who are watching today have you had a cup of coffee today, perhaps? If you've drank any coffee product, it's important to remember that the first coffee that was carried to our country came aboard a ship. It came from the country that is now Yemen today, and it was carried here from a ship built in Salem, Massachusetts. So some of the products and things that we take for granted today first made their way here aboard ship, of course. So lots of those types of stories as well. It's a good way to look at our commerce and how it has progressed over the years. And of course, many of us, especially with summer coming up, we like to think of the fun and the sport of sailing. New Englanders have, of course, been hardworking and built many working vessels over the years. But many of these vessels either were turned into ones that were used for fun. You see here the Windjammer Louis R. French up on the Maine coast off Owl's Head on your left there. And this is actually the oldest two-masted schooner left in the country. She was built in 1871, only measures 35 tons. However, she was a working ship right up into the 1970s before she began her second career as a windjammer. And even today, if you were to trod her deck, you would see the old-fashioned kerosene running lamps and things like that. The sails that were made for this vessel were made by the same sailmaker that makes them for the USS Constitution today. And so it's a fabulous experience when you go aboard a ship like this. Again, the oldest of its type. What did she do earlier in her career? She was served in the fishing industry, but also carried loads of granite. So when you think of our granite curbing on our roads throughout New England, it was small vessels like this that were bringing these raw materials to countless towns along New England coast, or in this case, the Maine coast. Now, if you've been a resident or nearby resident of Long Island Sound, or perhaps Narragansett Bay, perhaps you're familiar with the America's Cups yachts and things like that. So we can't talk about any New England shipbuilding without talking about Nat Harrishoff and his yacht that he built for the defense of the America's Cup out of Bristol, Rhode Island. And here we see the Columbia on the left facing the British competitor, the Shamrock. The Columbia was just one of Harrishoff's finest vessels ever built. It was built for the defense of the America's Cup in 1899, and actually was the first yacht to do it twice. She defended the America's Cup again in 1901. It's an important vessel too. Some of these other side stories that I like to tell, for example, in the 1899 defense of the America's Cup, the Columbia also carried as part of her afterguard crew a woman, the wife of the owner. Her name was Hope Iselin, and she is known as the first woman to take part in an America's Cup event like this. So a little bit of people history as well. It's not just about the ships and how they were built, but it's also the people that are associated with them. So these are some of the more fun aspects of sailing, and that's how I really got my interest in shipbuilding. My father was a native of Connecticut and sailed on Long Island Sound from Stratford, Connecticut. as a young man. And so I can remember him telling me that. And of course, my visits as a child back to Connecticut always drummed up this, and combined with my visits over to Mystic, I always knew that I was going to move to New England because of kind of my inherited love of ships. And then there's the ships that were built. These are very small vessels that had some pretty wild adventures. And these are the stories that some of them were at one time famous. I'm not sure too many folks remember them now. And some of them are kind of obscure stories. On the left, you see a man and a woman, Thomas and Joanna Crapo, from New Bedford, Massachusetts, in a small vessel, 19 feet long. They sailed across the English Channel. They made it in 49 days. Thomas Crapo was an experienced sailor. He did it on a lark. But what he proved was that not only was he an outstanding sailor, but he had this boat built specially for him. So it really showed the finest of the small vessels that were built in New England. When we think of shipbuilding often, we think of some of the largest vessels out there, the clipper ships and the large steamships perhaps, and the passenger vessels, but even small vessels, I like to tell their stories. It's funny that Thomas Crapo originally planned to make the journey alone, but his wife Joanna said, "Nope, I'm going with you." And the New York Times even questioned him and said, can a man survive a 49 or 60 day or however long his journey was going to take, cooped up with his wife in a cabin that measured about 6 by 6 feet? Well, they actually did it, and quite well. So and had many adventures along the way. The other vessel flying the American flag that you see there is the Spray, that was captained by Joshua Slocum. And his was a rather famous event. He made a solo voyage around the world from 1895 to 1898. And again, his story at one time was rather well known, very famous. He wrote a book about his adventures. I feel it's less famous today, unless you're really a nautical buff, so to speak. But it's a fabulous thing what he did. He found this old ship kind of wasting away in a shipyard in Massachusetts, and refurbished this vessel and took it on a voyage around the world. Why? Because he could. He was an experienced ship captain and wanted to do something toward the end of the age of sail that would kind of make its mark, and he certainly did. And of course, I make the argument in my book that ships are kind of the lifeblood of New England, our commerce, part of our heritage. They brought us some great things. Connecticut's Stonington's Captain Nathaniel Brown Palmer was an outstanding sailor. I think he epitomizes the New England sailor in what he did. As a young man, just a teenager, he commanded a Groton-built vessel called the Hero, a very small ship, took it down to Antarctica as part of a sealing expedition there, and in the process made some discoveries down there to rival what the Russians were doing down there. So, and that wasn't the only part of his career. That's probably the least known of his career. He later became a famous packet captain, and later a famous clipper ship builder, and so on. So he really had a great career. When we talk about tragedy in shipbuilding, I cover a few shipwrecks, of course, but we also, again, we can harken back to the military days. One of the Continental Navy frigates that was built during the War for Independence was built right in Connecticut, right on the Connecticut River, actually, at what is today Portland, Connecticut. Sailed down the Connecticut River to the ocean, and a few years later got in a nice little battle, one of the most heated naval battles in the entire Revolution. Probably a battle, and again, unless you're a nautical buff, you've never heard of, One of the men that lost their lives is pictured here, or his gravestone is pictured here, Jabez Smith, who was a lieutenant of Marines aboard the ship Trumbull. And here we see, as far as I know, the only likeness of that vessel, which is carved upon his gravestone. So even as you wander through our New England cemeteries, every once in a while, you'll find a nice little surprise like this. And of course, as I say, these vessels, whether you're interested in the age of sail or you're interested in modern vessels, these vessels have made their mark from New England. You know, eventually shipbuilding would, you know, migrate away from New England. It would head down to New York, the Delaware Capes, Newport News, Virginia, that area. And of course, the California coast, Texas, places like that. But New England has the longest history of it, of course, and the most experience, and we're still doing it today. I talked about the clipper ships, which made their mark in the decade of the 1850s. One of my favorite stories is a one that, and maybe unless you live in Connecticut, one that few people know about. Chances are, if you know about clipper ships, you can probably name the Flying Cloud, right? A famous clipper ship built by Donald Mackay up in Boston. But if you're not from Connecticut, you may have never have heard of the Andrew Jackson, which was the only clipper ship to beat the Flying Cloud. She did it once. So one of the most outstanding of the clippers built. And of course, the USS Nautilus, another pioneer, built again by General Dynamics down there, the first nuclear powered vessel in the world. And again, a museum ship that you can check out today. And again, most of these ships are gone, but I do like to cover a few museum ships. And the USS Massachusetts, built at the Four River Shipyard, one of the finest of the wartime shipyards in not just New England, but in all of America. So the old Mamie, that battle cruiser there, had a storied career during World War II. And even the age of sail, the vessels on the left, the Hesper and the Luther Little, were four-masted schooners that were built in down near Taunton, Massachusetts. And they never really had much of a career, and they ended up languishing up in Wiscasset, Maine. And millions of tourists saw these vessels from the 1930s until they finally disintegrated in the late 1990s. So if you made a trip on the Maine coast sometime before 1995, there's a very good chance that you saw those vessels. In my book, I tell the story of these vessels. And so I say again, whether you've sailed on a ship or not, I think my book is for you. I think you'll enjoy the history of it, and also kind of the tying the activities of the sea and the personalities behind these vessels that really help to tell the story of New England. On the left, in this view, we see the museum ship, the F.E. Morrissey, which originally was built as a fishing vessel, later served as an Arctic exploration vessel, even did some work during World War II, later served as a packet ship carrying immigrants between the Cape Verde Islands and Massachusetts. And it was actually the last sailing ship to carry immigrants to our country. And of course, the USS Nautilus on the other side, got to pay homage to her. So again, these are the types of stories I tell in my book. And if I've done my job here tonight, hopefully you will be excited to check out the book. There's a lot of summer reading to be done here. And of course, Father's Day is coming up too. So let's not forget the dads out there. And there's a lot of good armchair adventures. And I like to point out as well, even if you've never sailed on a ship, this book, I think, will touch a chord with many of our viewers out there. I'm assuming I'm probably speaking to the choir out there, but as I tell people, spread the word. There's a lot of good history in the tales of these ships. And so with that, I'm going to say if we've got any questions, anyone wants to put those in the chat, we can do that. I hope you will, if you're in the area, check out Savoy Bookshop over in Westerly, who's sponsoring our event tonight. I really appreciate Steph moderating us here. And also, of course, the Bank Square Books over in Mystic. If you're going to go down to Mystic Seaport, make sure you make time to stop in the bookstore, get some cup of joe or whatever. Okay.
Yeah, there's an excellent donut shop across the street from Bank Square in Mystic. And then, of course, Savoy has its own cafe. So
Excellent.
yes, thanks for that. Thanks for that, Glenn. We have had a couple of questions come in. Well, first I'll say Carol had a comment that I thought was really interesting. She said, my husband's great, four greats, grandfather was Zachariah Hillman, shipbuilder who built the Charles W.
Built the
Morgan.
Charles W. Morgan.
Yeah,
Excellent.
yeah,
Well,
that's a
I'm going to hope
really
that
cool
she knows
connection.
the story of Hillman. Yeah, he was a well-known builder in New Bedford and things like that. So
Mm.
yeah, those are the types of family connections too. I always hope when I write a book like this that someone says, "Hey, that might have been a relative of mine that
Right.
sailed on that ship, or maybe even built it." So who knows?
Yeah, that's
It's a small
fascinating.
world, huh?
Right, right. And then John has chatted in and has asked, back in colonial days, were the wooden ships imported from England or were they constructed here in New England? If so, where, what towns, etc.?
Okay, so that's a very good question. And they were not imported. The early shipbuilding started again 1607. That was a failed colony up in Maine, but they built a ship to escape. That ship that they built actually made several visits back to Jamestown, the colony down in Virginia. But right away, once New Hampshire was settled, the Plymouth plantation was settled, uh, shipbuilding began. It began on a very small scale, as I tell it in my book, John. But almost every town, every coastal town started doing some shipbuilding early on. The early shipbuilding centers were places like Salem and even Portsmouth on the Piscataqua River. But anywhere there was a settlement on the coast, they started building small vessels at first, towns like Salem, Marblehead, but all up and down the coast. Southern New England, it's funny, was settled a little bit later, of course. So Connecticut shipbuilding got started about 20 years later in the 1640s, and the same with Rhode Island. So really it starts to the north in Massachusetts and New Hampshire and Maine. And eventually as Southern New England is settled, places like Hartford and New Haven and the colonies there are settled. By the 1640s, we start to see ships built there. So no importing of ships. And very soon, the mother country actually was, by the 1690s, England was contracting. The Royal Navy was building ships in New England. So, and I
Oh,
tell that
wow.
story as well. So why? Because we had a lot of wood available and it
Mm.
was available right close to the coastline there. So
Wow, that's really cool. I didn't know that.
yeah.
So I have a little bit of a selfish question. I mentioned earlier that my husband and I just relocated to New England from Alabama.
Yeah.
So I am curious. We've been trying to, learn a little bit more about the area that we're in. So is there a ship nearby that, is available for tours, or a ship-related museum that's here in New England that we could maybe take a day trip to?
Oh, sure. Well, I mean, if you're in Westerly, you're not far from Mystic. So,
Right.
I'm going to always recommend the Seaport Museum,
Yeah.
the
We
Charles W.
haven't been yet, but
Morgan.
it's on
Yeah,
our
the
list.
Charles W. Morgan and some of the other vessels they have there are outstanding.
Right.
I'm trying to think what Rhode Island has, and I'm not coming up with anything to mind, but except you take a trip to Bristol and check out the
Mm,
Harrishoff Museum if you have an
okay.
interest in the America's Cup yachts and things. And then
Yeah.
you're really not that far away from Plymouth Plantation, where you can go on a a replica of the Mayflower. Now, I like to point out that the Mayflower was not built in America. That was an English ship, but
Right.
still, it'll give you a little bit of that nautical flair and stuff like that. And of
Right.
course, if you're willing to, brave Boston, you got to check out the USS Constitution. It is a one of a kind experience. So
Oh,
well
that's
worth
great.
checking out. But Mystic is for you, Steph. You got
Yeah.
to hit Mystic.
Okay. And Eugene has chatted in and said that Rhode Island has Battleship Cove,
Oh,
which I'm
that's
not
right. I keep
familiar with.
forgetting
So,
the USS Massachusetts. So
okay,
yeah,
great.
right
Oh,
in.
well, I've just added a bunch of things to my list. So
Yeah,
that's
so you
awesome.
got some summer traveling to do.
Yes.
And once again, the book too, again, whether you're into the military or you like the old-fashioned sailing ships, it's got a little bit of everything. And this is a book I had contemplated writing for a long time. I've done some, a previous book on the American clipper ship, which was a very comprehensive and in-depth look on every single detail, which really was for those who really wanted to immerse themselves in that. And I love that book. But this book I really like because it's kind of a primer, and it gives you a taste of everything, and it can set you off in any direction. I've got a lot of
Mm,
different resources that I list at the back of the book that
right.
may send you to the bookstore or on the internet many, many times to chase down some other information. So
Yeah. Thank you everybody for chatting in. John has also said that New Bedford has a whaling museum.
oh, that's
So
of
that
course.
sounds
I
great too.
yeah,
I'm writing all of these down.
yeah,
So
yeah.
thank
You can't
you.
forget New Bedford, another whaling center and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's so many good nautical attractions, and even for Westerly, where Savoy is,
Hmm.
you check out the local historical society. Actually,
Right.
Westerly did have some good shipbuilding activity. They built a clipper ship or two, so no replicas available, but there's plenty of information out there.
Great. Well, we're looking forward to it now that restrictions have kind of lifted
Yeah,
and everyone's getting out and about more. We're looking forward to getting to know our
yeah.
area a little bit better. I'm curious too, were there any ships or like specific stories that got cut from the book before it went to print?
Well, that's always the eternal argument between the
Right.
publisher and the author. This
Right.
this started, I think, as a 100 vessel, the top, 100 vessels that made history. And unfortunately, we had to edit it down. So there were some other ships that I would have liked to have included in there. I think in the publisher's view, they were a little bit more obscure, but in my mind, I think they were, pretty interesting. So yeah, but the sources that I cite in my book, they'll send you to some of these other places where you'll easily find it. I like my book too because it can provoke a little argument as far as why did you include this vessel? Why is this more important than another one? And I've already had one museum ask me, well, why didn't I include this particular ship that they had an
Mm,
association with? And I said, well, it really is my book. I got to pick what I chose,
absolutely.
and
Yeah.
it's really hard in New England because you could pick 1,000 vessels, for
Yeah.
example.
Yeah, this book
That
is extensive, but I'm sure it could have been much
oh
bigger.
yeah. Well, we look at, I like the idea of this. It's not a dumbed down book by any means, but
Right.
I like an idea for a general reader who,
Yep.
maybe doesn't want to the super deep dive, but wants to
Yep.
learn more about
Absolutely.
their area or whatever. So,
Mhm.
there's plenty of good nautical, uh, things that you'll learn in there, but I didn't want to do a textbook. I wanted to do
Right.
just kind of a nice, fun book, but yet one that was pretty good. So yeah,
Yeah.
if we could have gone bigger, yeah, we could have added another 30 or
Oh,
so ships.
wow.
But I think we've got a pretty good essence, regardless of of what New England shipbuilding is all about.
Yeah, no, I feel like it's the perfect size for somebody
Yeah,
that just kind of wants, an overview and, to
yeah,
just kind of learn a little bit more about the
yeah,
history. So I know we've got plenty of copies in stock, both at Bank Square and at Savoy, and I've already seen people flipping through them. Coming in wanting to learn more about the area. We've got them in our kind of local history section. So
yeah,
I another question I have too. I do read nonfiction, but I'm also a big fiction reader as a
yeah.
bookseller. So I'm curious if you have any favorite fiction books about ships or.
Well, that's an interesting question. Geez, I'm going to have to think about that. But I am going to go to. Everybody's going to groan when I say this. I am going to go to Moby Dick.
Right.
I
It's a
resisted.
classic for a reason.
It is a classic for a reason, and I resisted reading that book for many years. For a number of reasons, just because of length and stuff like that. But when I set myself to reading it, and I mean, I read a lot, but I read mostly nonfiction, believe it or not. So,
Yeah.
but when I read it, it really is a good story of the sea, and especially if you have an interest in whaling or the old time sailing ships, it really tells. It's really a good story.
Yeah.
Now, there are other books on the military side, like the Master and Commander series. I'm trying to
Right.
remember the
Yeah.
author, which was very famous and is known for its kind of its fine attention to detail and exactitude. And again, I'm a little I may be I'm in my late 50s. I remember growing up along those same lines, the Horatio Hornblower
Hmm.
stories. These men that served during the War of 1812 or things like that. So there are some out there. But as far as modern nautical fiction, that's just, I guess I'd say that's not my forte. So,
Yeah. No, that's
but
fine. That's where the booksellers come in because we can always
yeah, that you can
recommend them.
recommend. But there
Mhm.
are, I know that, and I like to tell my readers too that, for good local stories, I'm assuming that Savoy and Bank Square carry some very local works by either local authors or folks that are writing about what happened right there in Connecticut or Rhode Island. And I know, for example, I read a book a couple years ago about the privateers from I believe, the War of 1812 for Salem, Massachusetts. It was a really
Mm.
good book written by a local historian that talked about each of these ships that sailed out of that port. And I know that almost every New England seaport has those types of stories, whether they're a big book or a smaller work that really tell that story. And that's a
Right.
great way to get local history.
Right. For sure. So what's next for you? Are you working on anything else at the moment? I know this just came out, but is there
Yeah.
anything else you're working on?
Well, COVID, was a curse, but it was also a blessing. I lecture for the New Hampshire Humanities, and so most of my lectures either went to Zoom, so my traveling went down to nothing. So
Yeah,
I
right.
wrote I had a lot of books on the back burner that I brought forward last year. So I've got another book that's out about my local area here. I'm calling from dialing in from Lake Winnipesaukee area. So I have
Mhm.
a book about the history up here. And I'm also working on a Civil War related book that'll,
Okay.
yeah, probably won't be out till next year. But yeah, so I've
Okay.
got some other irons in the fire. So
Great. Great. Well, we will look forward to
yeah,
those. And just before we sign off for this evening, I will post the link again into the chat for this one. If anybody doesn't
yeah,
already have a copy, feel free to go ahead and order it. Like I said, Bank Square and Savoy both have plenty of copies in stock, so they are ready to be picked up or shipped out. And thank you so much, Glenn. This has been a really interesting event. I know I've gotten a lot of great ideas for little day trips and things to do around the area to learn more about it. So thank you
excellent.
so much.
Well, it's been my pleasure, and I'd like to thank everyone for watching. And I can't thank Savoy and Bank Square enough. We need our local bookstores to continue to not just survive but thrive. So I ask our viewers here to make sure you get some business their way. The book is not going away just yet.
No, we agree. Thank you so much for that, Glenn.
All right.
Thanks everybody for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. And don't forget, if you want to go back and rewatch it, it will be available on YouTube later on. So have a great evening, everyone.
All right.
Bye.
All right. Thanks, Steph.